Our next speaker is Janet Berlow from the University of Rochester. Janet is Professor of Art History and Visual Cultural Studies at the University of Rochester. He has a PhD from Yale University and has written numerous books and articles on Native North American art, including the influential Native North American Art survey that Oxford University Press, which he co-authored with Ruth Phillips, and is the main rival for my book, but you know, they ganged up on me, so it's better. Anyway, I'm happy to introduce Janet Berlow, who will be speaking. Her title of her talk is Erotic Topographies and the Work of Kay Walking Stick. Janet.
Thank you very much. When I was asked to take part in this symposium to honor and celebrate the work of Kay Walking Stick, a painter whose work I've long admired, I decided that I wanted to take a risk. I didn't want to provide yet another art historical examination of her work. The authors of the catalog have done an impeccable job of that. And in particular, I want to acknowledge Lisa Robert-Seppi's marvelous essay on desire, the body, and the divine, which you heard a little bit from that today. And my comments on some of the same issues are merely an addendum to her far more thorough approach to this topic. My own starting point is art historical, but I'm choosing to move into a more personal realm, an exploration that is essayistic as well as scholarly, that acknowledges the ecstatic as well as the painterly and the cerebral. A short talk that acknowledges the ripe subjectivity of the female body and all that it desires, as much as it acknowledges the fluency of a painter in the prime of her powers. My risk also involves walking a tightrope over a vast canyon of stereotypes without falling into that abyss. For the history of Western writing and thinking about women and about natives is fraught with assumptions and tired stereotypes, as several decades worth of feminist and post-colonial analysis have revealed. In Eurocentric systems of thought, woman has always been a marked category, the other, the essentialized. Woman has long been the physical to man's cerebral. And woman, of course, has long been nature to man's culture. In this regard, the categories of woman and native are similarly marked. For since first encounter, indigenous people of the Americas have been identified as nature to Europe's culture. The subjectivities of women and natives have been circumscribed and diminished by these assumptions. Yet sometimes we find that on the flip side of a reductive stereotype, some deep truth is revealed. For example, many native artists do, of course, feel deeply about nature, about land, and about attachment to land. This is often expressed in visual terms. Native photographer Will Wilson, for example, expresses both his profound love of Deneta and his despair over the nuclear despoliation of his Navajo homeland in post-apocalyptic photos from his autoimmune response series. A native attachment to land, though, is not just based on half a millennium's history of dispossession, removal, and pollution. It's founded on a reverence bred in the bone of any indigenous artist who grew up revering as home the prairies of the Dakotas, the deserts of New Mexico, or the temperate rainforests of British Columbia. Yet as Walking Stick's work demonstrates, one's reference can also be one of affinity for one's chosen land as well as one's native land. Her love of the Italian countryside is an oil painter's affinity for the lands that gave us the burnt umber and raw umber of Umbria, and the terra di Siena manufactured in the Italian city-state of Siena for centuries. So what do we do with a female native artist who is a bold painter of both landscapes and bodily topographies, whose landscapes sometimes seem to be bodily topographies, who is fiercely intellectual and analytical in her relationship to paint, to surface texture, and to color, and who is fiercely visceral and sensual in her relationship to paint, to surface texture, and to color? What do? We take her on her own terms. And if we are female scholars and artists who strive to erase boundaries between the personal and the analytic, or the sensual and the spiritual in our own lives, we celebrate her fearlessness, and we identify with the mapping she has done of her own sensuality and of ours. Il Regalo, the gift, is one of many paintings Walking Stick created in response to her Italian sojourns, which included explorations of the mountains and valleys of the countryside, as we've already heard. The gift the artist gives us here is the visual celebration of the sensual, the natural, the female, and the divine, not as dichotomies, but as a unified vision. In her capable hands, the diptych format is not an either-or proposition. It's a metaphorical stereoscope, allowing us to bring into three-dimensional focus something we had only vaguely apprehended beforehand. That true integration means that there is no separation between the spiritual and the corporeal, for that's a Western patriarchal trope. Neither does there have to be a separation between the material of the earth and the materiality of our own bodies that we celebrate. In a 2011 interview with the Archives of American Art, Walking Stick noted her realization that, quote, "The landscapes I had been using were a stand-in for my own body." We see here an identification of the female body with the natural world that is neither reductionist nor patriarchal. It's an expression by a native artist and a woman in the full power of her ripe maturity. The words eros and erotic have been sadly abused in our culture, where there's a specious identification of eros with the pubescent, the barely ripe. For Plato, eros was the intermediate thing between the human and the divine. For many writers and artists, eros is the wellspring out of which desire, fecundity, and creativity emerge. That's what I see in Kay Walking Stick's diptychs, a visual chronicle of all that has arisen from her life's experiences and all that has been successfully integrated over the last several decades. As the artist herself has expressed it, it's through the body and the mind that we experience the spiritual. We need an awareness of the body-mind relationship in order to seek the spiritual. We need both a body and a mind to transcend. In Danae in Arizona, the woman of Greek mythology who was impregnated by Zeus in the form of a shower of gold is rendered in gold leaf. She's balanced by the lavender and golden mountains of the American Southwest. She's not the sleeping adolescent of Gustav Klimt's vision, but the resplendent female whose entire being has been transfigured. I see here not an impregnation by God or man, but a metaphorical alchemy. The artist paints a self-portrait of she who has given birth to her own powers of creativity and generativity with the help of the beauty and the grace of nature. In the middle of second wave feminism, the African-American poet Audre Lorde penned an important essay, The Uses of the Erotic, subtitled, The Erotic as Power. In it, she wrote, "When I speak of the erotic, I speak of it as an assertion of the life force of women, of that creative energy empowered, the knowledge and use of which we are now reclaiming in our language, our history, our dancing, our work, our lives." Lorde spoke of Eros as deep participation and as refusing to fear the yes within ourselves. In Audre Lorde's terms, Walking Stick has embraced the yes within herself. Her ecstatic landscapes reveal the process of searching and of finding, the fissures in our resolve and the fissures in the earth, the raptures and the kinesthetic memories that sustain us through harrowing times. I take courage from Walking Stick's role as an artist who has charted the messy physicality of life, its desires, its disappointments, its journeys through emotional crevasses and Italian mountains. She does this by harnessing carnal experiences to a rigorously unsentimental vision. Her vision was educated at Pratt in the stark language of abstraction. She's expert at using the formal properties of color and pattern to reduce complexity to an elegant simplicity. Her goal, she has said, is to make works that are simplified in their formal aspects and complex in their emotional impact. In this, she has definitely succeeded. In some instances, hers is a vision honed by grief and personal loss, as we see in these paintings that transformed the artist's pain at the death of her husband into works of stark beauty that allow the rest of us to find our own griefs expressed in these canvases too. Kay Walkingstick came of age as an exhibiting artist slightly before the rise of second-wave feminism in the late 1960s. As we've seen in other talks today, and as we'll see in the exhibit, her works participate in the important visual dialogues of our times concerning abstraction, color theory, and landscape. They also participate in an important female conversation about the meaning of representation and self-representation. Starting in the late 1970s, some American feminist artists began to cast off the ponderous weight of the male gaze as it had existed for hundreds of years in the history of art. They began to refuse the weight of representation that the female body was supposed to bear. Hannah Wilke, for example, was interested in subverting the male gaze for her own use. In the Starification Objects series, Wilke deployed and subverted the power of female beauty. Stuck to her body in this image are tiny vulvas made of gum chewed by spectators at her performances. Wilke both participated in and burlesqued male notions of female beauty on her own terms. In contrast, Walkingstick's work is never didactic or polemical, not for her, Wilke's chewing gum or porcelain vulvas. Walkingstick's early depictions of the female body, as we see here, are rigorous explorations of pattern, shape, and color, but with a strong female subjectivity. In Joyoso, intertwined legs and gold leaf perform a joyous dance, for, as Jessica Horton reminds us in the catalog, Walkingstick seeks to convey an embodied experience, not just an optical one. American women's artistic self-representation of the last few decades is a topic too large for my brief remarks today, but suffice it to say that I believe that Walkingstick has few peers. But one artist of her generation who comes to mind is Joan Semmel, also trained at Pratt, who in the 1970s began a lifelong visual exploration of the subjectivity of the female nude. These explorations have taken many forms, but in the last 15 years have focused on uncompromising studies of the artist's own body in oil on canvas and on a large scale. Her use of mirrors and cameras makes it clear that it is the corporeality of an adult woman, not a nubile body for the dilection of the male, that she seeks to chronicle. Semmel is literal and Walkingstick is metaphorical, but both seek to redirect the practice of looking away from the long history of the male artist's eye assessing women. They assert the primacy of the female gaze, the woman as artist appraising herself and painting what she sees and knows to be true. In each case, what the artist sees is a mature, ripe sensuality. Modern visual culture bombards us with so many images of budding girlishness and compliant sensuality that we're almost convinced that that's all there is, even when this denies our own experience. As a side note, I find it fascinating that there's little overt exploration of female sexuality in contemporary art made by younger Native women. With few exceptions, their generation has chosen to explore themes other than the sensual. The colonized body, the missing body, or, as in Rebecca Belmore's majestic work, Fringe, which you see here as a billboard above Montreal, the wounded body. I'd like to bring my talk to a close by evoking a poet. The great Mexican poet Octavio Paz once wrote, "Beyond, outside of me, in the green and gold thicket among the tremulous branches, sings the unknown, it calls to me." I say, in the green and gold and umber and burnt sienna thickets of Kay Walkingstick's erotic topographies, the deeply known calls to me. Kay, I thank you for making visible the synesthesia of female experience, the sensuality of paint and viscous bodily fluids, as well as the emotional transcendence that comes when contemplative, corporeal, and natural topographies are all in harmony. Thank you, Kay.